All right, well, let's get started. So hello and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to talk about AI and ESG ratings. I'm Megan and I'm on the marketing team here at SESAMm. Before we dive in, I just have a few very small logistic notes. Of course, everyone is on mute as you would expect to limit the distractions, but we do have a Q&A box at the bottom, so please drop your questions in it as we go through the webinar, and we'll tackle all the questions at the end. We are, of course, recording the webinar and we'll send it out at the end of by the end of the week for sure. So you can watch it again or feel free to share it with your colleagues. On the agenda today, we'll be discussing the upcoming ESG regulations for rating providers, then take a quick look at ESG data availability and its challenges before we move on to talk about CSRD and the ISSB impacts on data standardization. And last but not least, we'll tackle some AI applications in ESG ratings. And leading us through these discussions today are two speakers. First up, we have Dr. Julia Haake. She leads the ESG Rating Agency with EthiFinance. Over a period of 15 years, Julia has held senior client-facing market strategy and product development related roles within ESG rating and research institutions such as Moody's ESG Solutions, ISSESG, and more. Julia has been working in sustainability, CSR, and ESG since 1993 when she started as a researcher. And joining her today is our very own Sylvain Forté. He's the co-founder and CEO of SESAMm. Sylvain is an engineer and entrepreneur whose passion for AI and finance led to the creation of SESAMm in 2014. And Sylvain holds a double degree in engineering from Germany and France. And with that introduction done, I'll hand it over to Julia, if you could introduce us a little bit to EthiFinance.
Sure, thanks a lot, Megan, and nice to see or not see you all here. So EthiFinance, just in a few words, we're a European company with two main activities, one of which is credit rating and the other is ESG rating and other services, serving mostly European clients throughout the continent. We have 160 employees in our 5 offices in France, Germany, and Spain. And yeah, we were founded 20 years ago, so we're out of our infancy. Sometimes it does still feel like a startup company because, you know, we've been growing a lot over the last 3 to 4 years. And all of the topics that we'll be talking about today are obviously very new for us as well. So happy to be here.
And thanks a lot. Thanks, Megan, and thanks, Julia. Happy to give a quick intro of SESAMm as well. And thanks everyone for joining the presentation. So as you may already know, SESAMm is a, let's say, old startup company now. So we've been there since 2014. It's been 10 years at this stage. And we focus on providing ESG controversy and reputational data to players both in public assets, private assets, and also corporates. And we basically use AI to track information from more than 25 billion documents in 100 languages in order to identify controversies on around 5 million companies. So really trying to cover as much breadth as possible. And SESAMm is a firm of around 100 people present on 4 different continents. Most of our team is in France, but we also have offices in Tunisia, in New York, in London, and in Tokyo. And yeah, very happy to participate in this conversation with Julia from EthiFinance.
All right, well then let's get started with our discussion. So first up, we have a question for Julia. As ESG regulations continue to evolve in the EU and the UK, what are the most significant regulatory changes that rating providers should prepare for? And how do you see these impacting the broader ESG landscape?
Yeah, sure. So upcoming regulation for ESG rating providers is really the utmost thing that is sort of shaking up our little world at the moment. And as you said, there is a regulation upcoming in the EU, but also in the UK. The EU text, we basically know what it will contain and has been voted by the Parliament a couple of months ago, and we're waiting right now for publication in the official journal of the European Union. So it should come out in the coming weeks, we hope. To then be applied or applicable starting early 2026. So we have another year and a half to prepare for compliance. So the changes that are coming up for ESG rating providers are, mostly around two big topics, and then some other more secondary ones. So the first one is really all about transparency. So we as ESG rating providers will have to make our methodologies public, really explain to a larger public, but also obviously to the companies that we rate or the entities that we rate, and also our clients, investors, and financial institutions. So we'll have to explain in pretty much detail how we come up with scores and with ratings, also what the underlying methodology is. Sort of, probably most of you have heard about double materiality versus single or financial or impact materiality. So all of these things will have to be explained. Also, the scoring systems, how do we come up with our scores, and how do we weigh the different factors, topics, and indicators within our scoring system. So that's going to be something new, obviously not completely new, because we've always been, and that's the case for all of the ESG rating providers, very transparent, more to a lesser or more stronger degree for some of us, to our clients. So clients have, they're really able to understand in detail how our ratings work. But, companies sometimes have been complaining, and other stakeholders, that, that we should open up the black box. So this is really going to happen pretty much in a more or less short time frame. So, and the second big aspect is conflict of interest management. So for those of us who don't have these yet, which is the case for many, except for those who were already regulated as ESG, as credit rating entities, or as proxy voting providers, or other regulated types of entities. But for the others, this is new. So we'll have to, also verify how the analysts are linked to rated companies through investments, for example, or through former employments, etc., etc. And we'll also have to separate businesses, our ESG rating businesses, from some areas that are or activities that are considered problematic, such as credit rating or audit activities, consulting activities, asset management activities. So a lot to do and prepare for. So in terms of impact on the ESG landscape, I just wanted to say that not the whole landscape is equally impacted by this upcoming regulation. So data providers, pure data providers, for example, have been excluded from the regulatory text. So yeah, that was a choice that the European Commission has made, and the Parliament has validated. And also, index providers will have it a little bit easier at the end of the day, because they don't necessarily have to separate their businesses from their index business, because maybe the conflict of interest hasn't been considered equally important as other problematic areas. So, right. I mean, there will be an impact, not in the same way for everybody. We think, as a mid-sized company, that the impact will be more important for smaller providers, right? Higher, the same costs to bear and a little bit more constraints. But so we'll see. Is there going to be even more market concentration as the ones that we've already seen over the past 5 to 10 years? But yeah, but I mean, overall, it's a good impetus. So we feel really happy about the regulation because it makes ESG ratings easier to understand, and more comparability and more same rules, more level playing ground.
All right, thank you, Julia. And then we have a follow-up for Sylvain here. What is SESAMM's position on regulation as a raw ESG data provider, and what are SESAMM's plans?
Yeah, that's a good question. Indeed, like Julia mentioned, the impact is different for different types of entity. As of today, SESAMM is considered a raw ESG data provider. But that being said, there are developments that we are making that progressively touch more and more on ratings, depending on how it is defined, especially in the context of numerical scores and specific types of rankings and companies that can be leveraged in addition to more traditional ratings. And in any case, there is really a sort of best practice ambition that we have in the industry. And we think the ongoing regulation process is what defines the gold standard at this stage. And though we were, to be honest, a bit disappointed that it wouldn't necessarily immediately apply to data providers directly, we still want to be a part and a player in this regulatory process. So we're actually going through that process at the moment and have the ambition to indeed be regulated as not just a provider, but also a ratings firm. We are part of EASRA, so the European Association, along with EthiFinance, with Julia, and with many other providers and rating firms who are in touch directly with ESMA and participating in discussion around the text, understanding the links, for example, between EU regulations, UK regulations, other geographies, and making sure that we commonly implement the best practices in the industry. So this is really our ambition, and we're going to push very hard in that direction. I would think it's important for data providers to be at the same level of transparency and of compliance as rating providers. Transparency is actually very key for us. So there was one thing that we did in the past few months, and that was very important for us, is we made our methodology fully public, so it's accessible online directly. And there's actually a fairly detailed methodology and product pages where clients can really access information on each individual scores. And Megan and her team have done a lot of work on that, so I want to thank them for this. And we actually go beyond this because there's also an element of transparency in AI. So there are sometimes questions around transparency of ESG scorings and ratings. So we address that with making the methodology transparent. But on the AI segment, we're also really trying to avoid any sort of black box effect. And so we're trying to make sure that we provide basically underlying contents as much as we can beyond just a score. And so what that means is, for us as an expert in controversy data, we're never going to provide just a controversy score without providing the underlying exact content with the methodology that explains how a specific article of interest, fully accessible from our platform, will then translate into a change in a numerical score or a change in a ranking, for example, in a specific benchmark. So that part of transparency is, I'd say, maybe slightly beyond the regulatory aspect, but operationally very, very important, especially in the context of AI. Then for us, one of the things that we're implementing, and we have less experience than EthiFinance on that, so we had to restart a lot of things from scratch there, is on the compliance elements. So there are a lot of documents to generate. Being a later stage company, we already have a lot of the existing traditional compliance documents in place, but we added several more to that to make sure to have all of the different charters and rules in place for the team to respect. There is less difficulties around separation of business. We don't have a consulting entity, for example. So that specific constraint is lower on our side than it would be on other companies. But the compliance need is as strong as for other institutions. So overall, at SESAMM, we're working to make sure that we implement the absolute best practices in terms of transparency, compliance, methodology disclosure, conflict of interest, etc. And it's also a way to really be respectful in terms of clients and to showing that as a data provider, we actually care about this and we're not playing against regulations. We're actually going with the industry, and we know that these rules are implemented for the good of asset managers and all of the players in the market. And lastly, I want to say, related to Julia's comment also, the reality is that these rules also create barriers to entry in the market, which also, it always has a positive and a negative side. The negative side is it tends to concentrate the market, and it sometimes can lower competition. At the stage where these rules are implemented at the moment, and for firms like us, we feel that it is a barrier to entry, so that is protective, but it is not strong enough to really create a massive challenge for a mid-sized firm, for us or for EthiFinance. So it remains bearable, but I'm sure it would be more difficult for very small firms entering the market. So that's something to keep in mind.
All right, great. So let's move on a little bit to ESG data availability and challenges. Starting once again with Julia, we have ESG data availability remains a key challenge for many stakeholders. From your experience, what are the primary data gaps, and how can rating agencies ensure the data they use is both reliable and comprehensive?
That is definitely a major challenge for us, and it always has been. It's getting better over time, obviously, as more and more companies do report on their ESG issues and policies, etc., etc. But there remain a lot of data holes and gaps, and obviously, I mean, the corporate sustainability reporting situation in Europe is very good when you have a look at large companies, right? When you go lower in the firm size, then it also gets weaker in Europe. But then if you move outside of not only the European Union but the Europe as a continent, then it really gets the situation gets more difficult. We have less reporting in the US and less reporting also in Asia, Asia Pacific, and then obviously in emerging economies, it's even less. So it is an issue, but all ESG rating providers have tackled this in more or less similar ways. So I mean filling those holes in reporting, but also filling holes when you have a new topic covered, such as biodiversity or cybersecurity, that's not traditionally really part of corporate responsibility, or is also a new topic for companies. Then there are various types of holes, if you want. In the data landscape. But as concerns the solutions, I mean, the most simple one, and I think the traditionally used one by the rating providers that have been around for decades now, was to basically put a bad score for a lack of transparency on a single indicator when you didn't find the information, right? So, but that obviously pulled the score of it, or the ESG score or rating of a company down in a little bit artificial way, if you want. So, some firms have started using average sector scores, so filling in basically the holes with average scores from all the other companies that report on a specific topic, which is not necessarily seen as very high quality of ESG data. So we often hear clients complaining about such types of practice that we at EthiFinance have not opted for. Obviously, then what you can also do is estimate or model certain scores, which is becoming more and more sophisticated, especially in the climate area or even on biodiversity. You have scores that you can develop based on specific proxy data, and then using sector models, input-output models, and so on and so on. So there are some pretty sophisticated models out there that allow for filling in holes with model scores. And then, the last, and from our perspective, the most important type of tackling the lack of certain reported data is to talk to the companies, right? So this is especially important for small and mid-sized companies, which we're specialized in at EthiFinance. It's really often helps to just get additional information when the company hasn't done their reporting yet, or where the reporting is not as sophisticated or diverse as in large firms that have the resources necessary to build a very holistic, comprehensive reporting. So for us, it's really the company dialogue that is key to delivering high quality data sets to our clients. But obviously, then you come back to the crucial question of business model, right? So employing people who do the job, who talk to firms, and who take the time. That means you have to pay obviously higher HR costs, which is something that all of the ESG rating providers are trying to do less and less, right? Because the traditional investor pays business model is a fragile one, and that also explains why there has been so much M&A going on over the last 10 years or so, or even more, in the ESG rating space. So it's a difficult, it's a difficult situation, obviously, or a difficult problem to solve, but you have to. We'll come back to the question of AI, obviously, but also more and more automation, or even outsourcing of data collection and so on. So it's a complex issue. We're not bored in our day-to-day activity.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we regularly have discussion with EthiFinance, and it's still really interesting to see what's the data part and automation, etc., and what's also rating firms' key expertise, like commentary, analysis, etc., which typically requires dialogue, requires human engagement, and that in some cases technology really can't solve. And there's interaction and interpretation. So that's it's a balance to find, but that one that can be very, very interesting actually to find, to also make sure that people can focus on what's really, really valuable in terms of interpretation in the industry. And just a mention also on the small firms topic, I can feel the pain, Julia. We have a lot of we have a lot of private equity clients, so small firms coverage is a very big topic for us. And there's constantly these questions of estimates, etc. And we know some providers have like estimates with just a linear regression on industries and sectors that actually exists in the market. And I'm always kind of fighting that, saying that's just a check the box exercise, but estimates are really, really a poor description of a number of analytics. So yeah, I think there are better ways to achieve company coverage, and estimates are maybe not the right default solution, yeah, even though it's easy to implement.
All right, and then continuing on with Sylvain, we have a follow-up. AI has been hailed as a solution to overcome ESG data challenges. Can you explain how AI is being used to fill these gaps, particularly in terms of sourcing and analyzing non-traditional or unstructured data?
Sure, with pleasure. So first, it's clear that AI can help scale processes on certain types of data sets. So it's basically the next steps of automation. AI can really deliver at this stage on this promise of expanding processes with beyond what would be achievable by humans. And so that means increasing the coverage of companies. So at SESAMm, we cover around 5 million companies, and we work a lot with the private equity segment. We work on small caps, mid caps, etc., that are otherwise difficult to cover. In private equity, we work with like Carlyle, Warburg, in France with Swen Capital, for example, more recently with NexiCap, etc. So going all stages of the market, from really late stage buyout to mid-market, even VC in some cases, and doing both work with GPs and with LPs. So coverage is really something that is allowed by AI because you can just analyze more documents and therefore more underlying firms. And that's also allowed by the language coverage. So at SESAMm, we process around 100 different languages. So we have the ability to capture and interpret data, for example, in Chinese or in Japan, where we have an office in Tokyo, and in other countries where it's really tough to get local coverage otherwise. Another element, and that's related to what I mentioned, estimates, is that ESG controversies are one of the few universal data sets. So you can get that type of information, which is that outside-in view on any industry, any sector, any size of company, but it is still specific to each company. And so there isn't that averaging elements that you can find an estimate. It remains very specific to companies. It's a narrow view, it's an outside-in view, but it is universal. And that's one thing that we're really leveraging at SESAMm, and the reason why we can also continue to expand from it. And overall, SESAMm and AI in general has now reached a very, very good level of accuracy with generative AI. That was not possible 5 years ago. And so the gap between qualitative and quantitative data has started to merge more and more, and that wasn't the case a few years ago. Transparency can be achieved with access to contents. That's what we do. AI allows for very timely data. So at SESAMm, we generate data sets every single day. So an update on controversies every 24 hours. And that's something that is really allowed by that automation, including on millions of companies. And that also allows us to not miss events on large companies, but events that may occur on more subsidiary or regionally. So I'm thinking, for example, Teleperformance, where the initial scandal happened in South America and was captured initially only by local journals in Spanish before hitting mainstream English-speaking media. That's typically what we do. So yeah, AI allows a lot of things, not everything, like a lot of qualitative interpretation requires human analysis. And I think our partnership with EthiFinance is a good proof of that duality. We provide controversy data on small and mid caps that are typically tough to cover. And EthiFinance does a lot of the commentary, analysis, deep dives, rating, which AI would typically not be able to.
All right, thank you. So next we're moving on to talking about CSRD and the ISSB. A question for Julia. With the introduction of frameworks like CSRD and ISSB, how do you see data standardization evolving, and what impact will this have on rating agencies when providing ESG assessments?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yes, there is a lot going on, and the world of ESG or sustainability reporting standards has really changed a lot over the last handful of years. Of course, we're kind of still at the beginning, right? So standards are coming out. CSRD is now up and running, and we're going to get the first reports from companies that have not been reporting before next year. So it's going to definitely change our world, but and it's going to have a strong impact within the European Union, but obviously less so, as I said earlier, in regions with no mandatory reporting setups, right? So ISSB is obviously the international standard for sustainability reporting, but yeah, we don't have that many countries yet that have committed to making reporting mandatory under the ISSB standard. So the data availability situation will definitely improve, but not everywhere in the same way, right? But yes, I mean, it's going to have a strong impact on ESG rating agencies. So first of all, I mean, we have to adapt to the new standards, and that's what we've done at EthiFinance. We have totally adapted our own data framework and ESG rating framework. So I don't know if all of the ESG rating providers are doing that as well, but for us it was really a no-brainer, because we hear so much criticism, right, from companies, and especially from small and mid-sized ones. They get so many requests from ESG rating providers, but I would say that's probably the smallest part, because they also get requests from investors, from banks, from their clients, right, through the supply chain. And then CSRD, I think we're coming back to that a bit later today as well. But for us, it was a no-brainer to say, okay, there is a standard coming. You guys are going to report on that standard, so we are going to adapt our own rating framework to the standard. So we'll basically have our own rating framework that'll be made up of about between 80 and 90% of indicators that are directly derived from the ESRS, except for governance and cybersecurity, which are covered in a not at all or in a much different way under the ESRS. So that was the first point I wanted to make. But then obviously, yes, impact on rating agencies, it's a very positive evolution, because it will eventually facilitate our work if more data is accessible, right? So it will lead to higher quality in ESG ratings, at least for European firms in a first step, right? And then we'll see in a second step how ISSB, ISSB standards will be used in other jurisdictions. But if you look a bit further out, and that was probably what you were thinking, Megan, when you were imagining that question. So what's going to be a bit longer term impact on ESG rating agencies? Will there be less need for ESG rating agencies? And we do hear it from time to time from investors, asset managers, who are themselves under very strong pricing pressure. They say, okay, once we have the ESAP, the European Single Access Point, which will basically be a point which is supposed to be a platform which is supposed to be launched in 2027. I don't know how that's going to be possible, but we'll see. I'm very curious. But once that ESAP exists, or any other platform that will make reported company data available to a broad public, then some or many, maybe, investors will want to take the data directly from those platforms, right, or directly from the companies. So that they will try to don't go through ESG rating and data providers for building their own scores, right? Because we do have maybe half of our clients, or a bit less probably at the moment, that only use our raw data, and then they build their own scores, right? But then there is a lot of work from reported data taken from companies to a coherent, purified, streamlined, high-quality data set, right? Even if it's not the ratings that the clients are looking for, but the data set. So I think those providers that are used to doing that data purification work, if you want, they will have a role to play, that's for sure, in the near and even farther future.
And on the regulatory side, just to bring, so you mentioned CSRD, Julia, as well. We're more focused on that, so we're less involved in CSRD, for example. CSRD is the next step, is on supply chain monitoring and risk assessment. So we do a lot of work in that space, especially with large corporates. It's going to be a critical application in 2025 for any corporates beyond 450 million in turnover. And the number of suppliers to track is enormous. Like in some cases, more than 100,000 suppliers for one firm. That's really the scope of the analysis. So our coverage of languages and coverage of small companies is going to be very beneficial here, especially for example, Chinese suppliers that are under a lot of scrutiny. So yeah, we do a lot of work on this. We've launched specific dashboards and a specific access dedicated to CSRD compliance, and which includes controversies, sector risk, country risk, partner networks for remediation, audits, grievance mechanisms, etc. So this is really the regulatory element that we're closely looking at the moment.
All right, thanks. Now let's dive in a little bit to talk more about AI applications in ESG rating. So this one, how transparent is AI when it comes to generating oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong question. AI is revolutionizing the way ESG ratings are calculated. Can you share some concrete examples of how AI has improved the accuracy or efficiency of ESG ratings, particularly in the analysis of large-scale data?
Sure, definitely. And I'll be quick. I know that we're running out of time, so I'll be very quick. So at SESAMm, we have two use cases: monitoring companies or due diligence. So I'll illustrate a couple of these, and I'll mention some clients that are public clients where we can explain what we can do. So the first one, of course, is EthiFinance. I mentioned this. With EthiFinance, we actually do both. So there's the monitoring, which allows EthiFinance to receive controversy data on small caps and mid caps, which can then power the scorings and ratings and contribute to that score after going through additional analysis by their team. And EthiFinance also uses us in the context of their one-track private equity due diligence analysis to do reputational checks one-off on small firms. Another example in the industry is Swen Capital, which is also one of our clients that we can disclose. So Swen Capital is very renowned in Europe as a large LP in the private equity market. So they use our platform for monitoring and tracking dozens of different funds that they invest in. So dozens of different GPs and their underlying participation, so as to be able to engage with GPs whenever some of their portfolio companies are exposed to controversies, and understanding whether GPs have implemented the right remediation. Another example is Crédit Mutuel Arkéa, for example. So going to the banking sector, Crédit Mutuel Arkéa uses us to track more than 2,000 suppliers. So there's the supply chain element and also investments with Arkéa Capital. And there's, again, that monitoring aspect, but also the due diligence aspect for new investment that they're making. And lastly, a lot of consultants are using us for due diligence reports, such as ERM or Ramble, for example. So just being able to write these controversy reports and integrate that in ESG reports. All right, so that's it on my side. Just wanted to mention a few different use cases.
All right, thank you. And I think we got just one last question for Julia. Given the growing role of AI in ESG ratings, what are some of the challenges or risks you see in integrating AI-driven analysis with traditional ESG assessment methods?
Right, so I'll try to be quick as well. So it's true that AI can be of great help in various areas on ESG ratings, in addition to what Sylvain has just described, which is more focused on the controversy side. But yeah, I think most ESG rating houses, or most, let's say, traditional ESG rating houses that are not, born out of the idea to use AI, because there are several companies out there who are really focused on that. But the more traditional houses are, I think, all experimenting, if not already applying AI to some steps in their work and their ESG rating work. So I mean, data collection is obviously one. Identifying sources, but then within those, often hundreds of pages long PDF reports from companies, identifying the right information, and really rationalizing the analyst work that is not of high value in terms of intellectual work, right? So that is definitely something that many are experimenting or already using. So high efficiency gains potentially to find in that area, and then obviously also more on the drafting side, drafting of text. So summarizing, explaining scores, summarizing the identified information. So that's those are all steps that can be done via AI. In other areas, and this is my stance, and I think many are in line with me, is that human intelligence will stay important also in ESG ratings. I mean, really understanding one aspect is important, understanding complex business models, right? Companies that are active in various areas and that have specific business lines, and really understanding the ESG challenges and the responses and the steps taken by companies to remediate problems and so on. That is something that is still, from my perspective, too complex today to be done by AI. And also, obviously, the analysis, right? I mentioned that simple text or simple summaries can be written by AI, but really analyzing a company's ESG performance, that is really something that today only a human analyst can do. Obviously, with the help of AI, but today we still need our human analyst. And then obviously the company dialogue, right? You don't want the company to ask Alexa or how did you come up with this rating, or where did you find that weird data? So I mean, from our perspective, the company dialogue is of high importance. Companies really appreciate it, and it's not something that we will outsource to any machine anytime soon, right? But yeah, to sum up, I mean, the ESG landscape is going through a lot of changes, obviously regulatory, but also from the AI perspective. I think the AI is certainly the most profound and impactful factor, that also because it's changing and improving so fast, right? I mean, 2 years ago, everybody was sort of, smiling and laughing about AI in ESG ratings, and today everybody is taking it really seriously. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, our landscape is going to have to change in a very, very important way, especially for the more traditional firms. And I told you that EthiFinance has been doing ESG ratings for 20 years now, so we're definitely among the ones that are still inheriting some of the workflow that we've been applying over the last several years, and we're going to have to adapt and be agile.
And Julia, I really hope we don't get to a dystopian future of robocalls for company dialogue with the company's robot speaking with the rating agency robot, but I don't think that's the case. And just want to highlight that just a bit of advertising on this. Remember that EthiFinance user already can do summaries and even smart AI reports inside our platform. So everything that you said on drafting text, etc., I fully agree. Like there's a lot that can be automated, and that part does create efficiency gains. So your users have access to that already. They just have to look at it in the dashboard.
All right. Well, thank you to both of you. Let's dive into the Q&A session. Just as a quick reminder to everyone, there is the question box at the bottom, so feel free to drop your questions in. I think we've got a good 10 or 15 minutes. We can tackle some questions. To get started, the very first one, will the future ESG ratings regulation lead to less divergence in ESG ratings and scores? It's a question for Julia.
Well, I mean, coming back to the ESG rating regulations, one of the let's say, criticism that ESG ratings have been facing over the last decade or so. And that criticism has really been also pushed by many academics who've carried out comparative studies of outcome of ESG ratings from different ratings providers, right? So they have looked at, how, I don't know, whatever company is rated by specific different ESG rating houses, and they've seen that the outcome is really different. And also, I mean, investors have been complaining about that, and companies have been complaining about that. That it's just so hard to understand why there are these strong differences. But I mean, so the question, will the future regulation tackle this criticism? No, because the European Commission has said they will not interfere with methodologies. So they will ask for transparency so that everybody can better understand the outcomes. And what I said at the very beginning about, double versus single materiality, that's actually one of the factors that very strongly influences the outcome of an ESG rating, right? Because if you look at only short-term financial effects on a company through ESG factors, then you have a very limited picture, whereas the double materiality approach, opens the whole picture up to many more, or a much more diverse number of topics, right? So, and then obviously the more topics you analyze, the different the results is. Yeah, so no, there won't be any impact on the divergence in ESG ratings. But obviously, I mean, given also the increasing standardization that we've discussed, there will be more convergence, at least, concerning the indicators used and that are underlying the ESG ratings. So yeah, but well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes, and also what the outcome of or what the effect of the ESG rating regulation on the ESG landscape will be 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
And I guess, Julia, that's really the same question that we got on the chat, and your answer is regulated, yes. Timeline is starting right now and with 2025. Standardized, not linked to regulation. It's more linked to the fact that the data is being more accessible and more standardized through CSRD, etc. But there is no, it doesn't force rating agencies or providers to actually converge. That should more be a sort of organic step, right, with the data collection process.
But then again, I mean, if you take a little deep dive, if you're bored on a weekend, into the ESG rating regulatory text, then okay, there is no standardization asked from ESG rating providers, but there is a strong, orientation in what you have to be transparent on, so that it'll be really much easier to understand. Okay, is this ESG rating actually, more of an E rating, more of an environmental rating, more of a social rating, or is it cross topic rating? And if it's a financial materiality oriented rating versus an impact materiality rating. So, and yeah, and also about the scores, the weights of the scores, and so on. So there will be a lot of material available to better compare the different results from rating agencies.
Okay, and do you think at some point the regulator will go one step further, and ESMA may really impose a close to a methodology framework, or do you think that's out of the question for the foreseen future?
Frankly, I don't see it coming. it's too complex, right? I mean, sustainability, how do you define it, right? And it's taken how many years to come up with the ESRS or with the ISSB, or, the process is not finished yet. So how do you define sustainability? How do you weigh environment versus social? How do you weigh, on financial accounting, we have rules that have been developed over decades, by the way. So we won't come up with an answer very short term, but also for financial accounting, you have internationally accepted rules, right? For sustainability, how do you agree on a topic like labor standards? Or how do you agree on a topic on the ratification of specific, Paris agreements or other international norms and standards that are very different from one country to the next, right? So it's just going to be very, very, very difficult. And maybe we will see, some standards on specific topics such as climate, or I don't know, biodiversity is once again such a complex topic that it'll be very, very difficult. And from one sector to the next, it's completely a different story. But yeah, so frankly, I don't see it coming. No.
All right, and I think we just have time for one very last question before we run out of time. This one seems to be on transparency. So when it comes to generating ESG ratings, how transparent is AI? Do stakeholders have visibility into the data and algorithms used by AI to ensure objectivity?
I'll take that one if that's okay. So indeed, so transparency for us is two different aspects. Is making sure that the raw underlying data is available. That's really key, that a human being can look at it at any moment. So typically that could be an article or a report by an NGO, for example, or a company document. So we need to make sure that there's always a link between a score or an event and the underlying document. So that's one way. And the second one is providing the intermediary steps of the algorithm. There's a lot of deep learning in the background and large language models, etc. So you can't achieve full transparency in terms of the weights that are used. But if you have intermediary steps in the process, such as, hey, let's ask the model if he or if it identifies any legal materiality, for example, for that topic, having been trained on doing this with regards to legal risk and level of involvement of the company and whether there is actually a trial or there's no trial yet, etc. Then we can actually take that answer and say, okay, that's actually a step in the process that you can review instead of just reviewing the final score of the controversy, for example. And so providing that metadata that has contributed to score and to final ranking is also something that is important. And that really aligns with what rating agencies are also doing, is trying to help clients understand the different intermediary steps of the methodology rather than just the final score. So again, we're aiming to apply the same rules here and going for full compliance with the new text also as a raw data providers, but yeah, soon to be also more of a rater.
All right, well, thank you, Sylvain. We better wrap up the webinar there, but a big thank you to both Sylvain and Julia for sharing their knowledge with us today and for everyone tuning in to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, Megan and the team.
Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.